Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Manage Mold podcast. Today, I am excited to introduce you to a good friend of our family. We have traveled the world literally together. We've been in Eastern Europe. We've traveled to different places in the United States, and he is one of the easiest people, as well as his family, to travel with, and that's always a good sign. And we've got Kevin Schneidermann here today from Basement Water Controlled. And Kevin and his family do all kinds of things with drainage, with foundation repairs, and interior drainage. And everyone who is listening today is going to learn a lot of really good information. Some of it, maybe most of it, you have never heard of, or maybe you have never considered. So, Kevin Schneidermann, welcome to the podcast.
Well, thank you, Dean. It's a pleasure to be here with you.
Why don't you tell us a little bit about how Basement Water Controlled got started and your involvement, how you got involved?
Okay. It was back in 1967. My mother and father-in-law actually started this little business up in St. Cloud, Minnesota. And my father-in-law answered an ad one day that there was this product that would help fix a basement that was seeping water. So he answered that and began the business years ago, that many years ago, 50 some years ago. Had successfully run it, helping many years. He was using a sledgehammer and a pick back then to bust out the basement floor and that type of stuff. So thankfully we don't have to do that today.
You've got tools now.
We have tools, yes.
Yes.
So that's how it started. And then back in 1990, 91, he came down with nasal cavity cancer. That brought him a setback, but his hard work and diligence, he trained me in while he was going through treatment for that cancer. He's still alive, grateful for that, and it's probably how many years now?
That's almost 30 years.
Right? Since
our
20. Family's been going at it. I always joke with people and say my sons began crawling in the trenches literally when they began to crawl.
Literally, yeah, absolutely.
But we enjoy helping people with a problem that they do not maybe know what to do with, or really don't want to have anything to do with it but to fix the leaking basement.
So you've been doing this for a long time. Do you have any family that helps you?
Yes, I have. My wife is in the office. She does the bookkeeping, and my daughter does a lot of warranty stuff off-site, and two sons are the main thrust behind the installation, the crew leaders. I do have another son that does like shop work for repair of tools and equipment that we have in the business. So.
Yeah, you've got the kind of tools and the kind of work that everything is hard on everything because you're dealing with concrete and soil and rock and all of that.
Yes, for sure.
Yeah, there's no magic work about what you do in a sense, other than some of the tools and machinery you get. You can't spray something and fix it.
Mm-hmm.
It's all elbow grease and up and down steps and pails of concrete and debris that come out of trenches, right?
Oh, for sure. And we've talked, Dean, a little bit about dust over the years, and I tell you, when I first started, I think we could hardly see each other across the basement.
Yeah.
Because of the dust, and that was terrible.
And now, how do you mitigate that?
No, it's incredible with the tools and the technology to draw the dust and that spreading air right off of the bit, basically, of the drill bit or even the chisel bit on the hammer.
So you're accomplishing three things with that. You're keeping the house clean. Or cleaner, right? Mm-hmm. You're protecting the workers, unlike in days past when you and I grew up working, a lot of this wasn't thought of, right?
Right. Right.
And then ultimately you're protecting the homeowners you're working with because you're not making their air dirty with all that debris that you're taking loose if you have to do that in a basement.
Exactly. Yeah. Very grateful for that.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit about what kinds of projects you do to give people kind of an idea of kind of the boundaries of what we're talking about today. Start on the outside maybe and tell people what you do on the outside.
The outside typically will be an excavation with a mini backhoe if groundwater, hydrostatic pressure is pushing in the walls or where the floor and the wall meet in a basement. So we'll excavate, clean the surface, apply a waterproofing membrane, and then beyond that, dimple board over top at the base, then lower than the top of the footing. That's the key of it, making sure it's below the floor surface. Putting in a drain tile system, filtration properly, and backfilling with the proper slope away. Um, Keeping that moist soil away from the wall.
Yeah. And
Yep.
so I want to just revisit the piece where you talked about putting the membrane on the foundation,
Hmm.
but you didn't stop with just putting and maybe explain what the membrane looks like to people so they understand how you're putting that on.
There's two possibilities. One would be more of it's almost like honey. It's a very thick product that adheres to the existing concrete wall. Um, Reasonable dry time, and then over top of that is a dimple board, so it gives space for air movement, so to speak, or just primarily just to keep the moist soil off of the foundation.
Yeah, you're making a break instead of a bridge. So instead of connecting or allowing that to connect right against your first membrane, you leave
Right.
the airspace so you have that thermal break instead of a bridge.
Mm-hmm.
And then
Yeah.
obviously the second part it's doing is it gives you a backup membrane, or really it's your primary membrane at that point because it's the thing against the wet soils. And then
Correct.
you've got the membrane that you actually rolled or brushed onto the foundation after it's been cleaned. And that really is the last stop for anything that wants to go through that wall.
Yes.
How many new homes do you see have a dual layer system like that?
We don't see a lot of new homes until later on, but I don't know of any really.
How about if I qualify that and say 1980 or newer homes?
Um, Zero probably.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. So when a home gets built, there's a couple things that happen. When they paint on whatever coating they're putting on, and for folks to understand, there are lots of different types of products you can buy, lots of different companies you can buy from. And if you know anything about life, not all products are the same quality. And
Correct.
so depending on who the builder was of that home or what development it might have been in, if it's in a city, you may have had a cost savings to buy a particular product over a best product that got put on your foundation. And so if you're in a home, let's say it's 5 years old and you already have leakage problems, and you're shocked and you're in dismay and you can't believe why that could be, there's a couple of reasons that we see. One, the quality of the product wasn't very good.
Mm-hmm.
Two, usually they put the lowest paid employee down in that trench to put the product on with the least amount of training.
That's about it. Right.
And you probably discover that when you wash these walls and see some of these.
Yeah, very accurate. Yep.
Yeah. So obviously the advantage, if you can do the retrofit on the outside, which I always think is the best fix, because if you can keep your foundation wall bone dry, your house will last forever, and if you keep the roof on.
Yeah.
But to add that second layer of protection, and then to place the drain tile in the correct elevation, the position that's low enough, those are really two key ingredients.
Yeah, most drain tile we do find is typically on the footing or near it at that same height.
Yes. Yeah. And so explain to everyone what happens when it's placed there in a really heavy rain or heavy water in the soil condition.
Yeah. a number of things. One of the main things, if that is laying right on the footing is kind of the base plate and it's straight. So there's no slope at all for gravity to take the water away from the basement foundation wall.
Yep.
The other is that the water can build up so quickly and so fast, and it's right there in that drain tile. It's going to likely force up where the floor and the wall come together in the basement.
How tall is that drain tile typically? The diameter?
It's 4 inches.
Okay. So for everyone, if you haven't thought about this, or if you've never seen how they put this assembly together, the very first thing once they've dug a trench to pour a wall for a house is the footing that goes in. And there's usually a notch in that footing that the new wall gets poured into and locks into when it's a poured wall. A block wall gets mortared onto the top of that footing. Correct so far?
Correct. Yep.
Okay, so the poured wall with the notch obviously has a little bit more resistance against water. However, you have to understand how small water is, and water will crawl between that wall. Where that wall seamed onto that footing, even with all that weight, water will flow between those two pieces and come in next to your slab of your floor.
Yes.
And here's where the trouble comes in. A 4-inch tall drain tile sitting on top of the footing means that water can build up in the drain tile 4 inches higher than the footing. And if you think about how the floor is on the inside, it's exactly on the other side of your foundation wall, poured on top of the same exact footing, usually 4 inches tall.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you get that drain tile full of water, and if it can't get out fast enough, or it fills up faster than it can get rid of the water, it will gladly go underneath that wall, come up around the edges of your floor, and up into your room. And oftentimes for people with carpet, or now especially with the floating floors in the basements, you won't see it necessarily.
All right.
Is that pretty accurate?
Very accurate, Dean.
Yeah.
Yes.
So Kevin and I are kind of like right hand, left hand. In the restoration work that we did all the cleanup from water getting in. Kevin's job is to discover why, and then fix that problem so it doesn't happen again.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of a right hand, left hand, and he understands a really big portion of it. We understand a really big portion of it. And as Kevin and I have shared over the years, and we've both taught each other so much about the other side.
Yes.
And that's been key. So what would be another issue on the outside? What would be the second biggest issue that you would find, or that you'd take care of on the outside?
Just recently in Minnesota here, as you know, I think they're going to rename Minnesota Minnesota.
Yes.
But what I see, it's just amazing. If there's a rain gutter on a house and there's a downspout coming down, probably 75-80% of the time, all of that water is going right down next to the foundation.
They're not dumping it on the lawn, right?
Right. It's dumping right there.
Yeah.
The downspout is laying right next to it.
Yeah.
So that downspout should be in place.
Yeah.
We've seen buckling walls that have possibly buckled just because of the spigot on the outside for the garden hose is dripping.
Yes.
About every 10 seconds.
Yes.
So.
Well, I have a retaining wall at my office that's 50 feet long that has been here since 1940. And 3 years ago, the home behind our shop got sold, and they changed, or they actually added gutters to the house, and they made one downspout aimed towards kind of our building and that wall, and it tipped that wall towards falling over. The power of water is amazing.
It is, and there you go. That's the key. There's either groundwater on the surface that's coming off and busting in onto the walls, getting them wet or falling, or what we deal with a lot is that groundwater coming up, then just that water table.
Yep.
So dealing with that.
When you're doing outside work and excavations, there's also the other system of getting rid of the roof water through those downspouts. Instead of going through an extension out to the lawn and away from the house, More and more, especially in developments and sometimes with the more expensive homes, but with a lot of homes now, you see them going directly into a vertical tile that disappears into the ground.
Yes.
And oftentimes it's a black tile. Do you find any of those? There are two types of tiles, just so everyone know. There's a non-perforated tile and a perforated tile when it comes to these black kind of accordion looking or corrugated plastic tile. And the non-perforated ones means that water can't get in and can't get out unless it comes in at the end or goes out at the other end. Perforated tile means that it's put into the ground, which this would be the one down by your footing. Perforated means it has all kinds of little slots or holes in it to let water get into it to get water to run out to another end. How many of these that are vertically placed where a downspout comes off the roof, how many of these are perforated that you find?
No.
You know where I'm going with this.
I guess too many would be they because a lot of times those perforations, if you're not looking real closely, you'll mistake that for a solid pipe.
Or you might have a builder that's the pipe that's laying there.
Exactly.
And it's just as easy to use that as to go get the right pipe, right?
Right. Yeah, it's just a little bit of water, Dean, isn't it?
Right. So explain to people what might happen if they use a perforated vertical tile and that roof is full of water, the gutters are full, and they are filling that tile up, and it's got perforations in it. What's it actually doing now where the foundation is? In a case where you haven't been there to put the double membrane system in, what happens?
Well, in a sense, you're actually exposing that soil to more water than if you would have just dumped it on top of the ground.
That's exactly right.
Yeah. So,
yeah. I was just at a home yesterday, did an inspection, and they had a hybrid system. They had a driveway that was about 3 feet lower than the front door. There was a little retaining wall. They had a nice, beautiful little stair step that came up from the driveway and a patio walkway.
yeah.
It was beautiful. They had one of the downspouts draining into a white PVC pipe instead. That actually went down into the ground about 2.5 feet, went underneath their little walkway and came and curved around. They had an elbow in the ground, and then it came out the retaining wall and had a little black grate on it. So it was PVC, white PVC, which means it had no holes in it. So all of the water that came off the roof went through that pipe. The pipe was sized correctly, and it dumped. It's not perfect in a northern climate to put it on your driveway because of the ice, but they had no other choice. That was they're in the city of Minneapolis. That was really all they could do. That was a stellar installation.
I guess.
Because they did it right. The water got away from the house. And I've been in homes where we find mold issues, indoor air quality issues, because there's a perforated tile at the corner of a house. What of what you see in foundation walls, which part of a foundation wall typically is most susceptible to water intrusion that you see in any foundation? We'll compare notes here a little bit.
Typically, it would be the corners.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly what I would say. And so if you have a downspout that comes and dumps into a perforated tile at a corner that's already the most susceptible part of water coming into your basement, you've just doubled down on it.
Yeah.
So it's really interesting, just that one little component that gets put in incorrectly, and it should have been something that looked either exactly the same without the holes in it, or maybe something else like a white PVC pipe.
Right.
It's the difference between a wet basement, and sometimes it's the difference between good health and poor health in a home.
There you go, for sure.
And it's real subtle, and you wouldn't think about it.
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
What else do you guys do on the outside of homes and businesses?
On the outside,
do you get into French drains?
To some degree. We do what we would call surface drain tile.
Yeah.
So if the hillside is next to them, and it's obvious that the groundwater is just running right at the house,
yep,
we'll put in a kind of a catch basin of a rubber membrane bladder sealed to the house. And it's usually 3 feet wide, so we can catch any overhang water if they do not have rain gutters.
Yep.
And we use a 3-inch perforated tile or 4-inch sloping to daylight. It has to be to daylight on this case. And then fill it up with landscape rock.
Yeah.
So the water coming down can be contained. It looks nice, but it's also solving the problem of water penetrating through maybe around those little basement windows or just seeping through the wall.
And you might have grass installed over the top of this.
Yes.
Or decorative rock, right?
Yes.
Or maybe an open style patio
Yes.
where it looks like a finished surface, but underneath is where all the work is being done.
That's correct.
Yeah, so it's hidden away.
Yes.
Okay. How about on the inside? Why don't you tell us about inside work that you do?
We talked a lot already about the floor wall seam in a basement where the wall is meeting the floor. And that's probably the most common water entry point that we find. So with that, typically we're removing a portion of the basement floor ranging from a foot wide to 2 feet and putting in an interior drain tile system that water is now being able to relieve that hydrostatic pressure through the interior drain tile. And oftentimes the water is also coming up through floor cracks or around a chimney or you name it, whatever's going into the floor, the water's coming up around it.
Yeah.
So
here's two things I want to kind of cover or capitalize information wise on this. So what you just talked about really was probably a retrofit to an existing or an older home that never had a drain tile in it. That's one case.
Yes.
And it's all around the perimeter, typically on the average size foundation, where you take that concrete out, you remove those soils that are there if the soils are bad, but you have to make room for your tile.
Yes.
You get your tile buried to the depth that you want, and then you put back material that is good for drainage, and then you re-pour the concrete to make everything back to normal, so to speak. That's one system, right? But then we've also got what I would consider would be a repair, because we have the sock problem. And why don't you tell people about the sock problem, where a house has an interior drain tile, it was put in correctly for the day that it was put in with the correct materials for what we understood, but tell everyone what happened to the sock tile in certain soils.
Well, the sock tile, yes, it's an incredible idea.
Maybe explain what the sock tile is.
So pretend that you got up this morning and you went to your sock drawer and you pulled your sock right over your foot.
Yep.
And there you go. You've got the sock on. So the sock principle was that you have this pipe full of holes, the perforated drain tile. So why don't we put a sock over it, and the sock will be the filter. So the drain tile doesn't plug up. However, what happens, then typically inferior filtration rock is put around that sock.
Yes.
And guess what happens? The sock plugs.
Yes.
So oftentimes we'll go into a home that, we have drain tile, everything's done, but it's still leaking.
And I have no water coming into my sump basket.
Exactly.
It's dry. It has to be dry, right?
Right.
Okay, now continue.
So there have been many cases where we maybe have come in and just took a sample out of the floor to look at the existing drain tile.
Yep.
And we found it, and there's the sock. So we tear the sock off just in that area, and all at once the water rushes.
It disappears.
Down. Yeah, it's gone.
So
that's a very vital thing. There has to be sufficient filtration around a drain tile pipe in order for it to even work.
Yes.
Yeah.
Kind of a gradation of filtering. You have your bigger filter and your medium filter, and you get to the sock filter that protects the pipe from the really fine particles going in and resting and filling up that pipe.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly.
Yep.
So it's really interesting because I grew up on a farm, and back in the day when I was young, I was the little kid up in the back of the box of the truck, and we laid cement tile in the day I was young. I know there were other farm kids older than me that laid clay tile,
Yes.
but we laid cement tile, and they were, anywhere from 10 to 12 or 14 inches long on the typical smaller lines, 4, 6, or 8 inches, typically 6 or 8 inches in diameter.
Okay.
And you just simply butted them up to each other in the ground. And so there's just this open seam in a sense, and you just butted it up. And if you had to make a little bit of a curve, you broke one of the tile and you took the broken pieces, laid it over the top, and then put the dirt over the top. And we never put a sock on those. And they kind of worked for years, mostly trouble free. So it's really interesting when they tried to do that really excellent thing in the home to protect that investment of putting that tile in, because obviously they must have found a problem with the tile filling up in certain geographic locations. So they put the sock on, and like you said, amazing thing, you take this concrete floor off the top, there's water sitting there, and you can see the sock. As soon as you rip the sock open, the water drains away.
Right.
And in those cases, the only fix is what?
Take out the whole system that's in place and replace it with a new drain tile system and proper filtration.
Yeah. So you're actually taking the perimeter concrete floor out so that you can get access to that drain tile. You have to take the drain tile out.
Yes.
And then you have to reset your elevation and get all the stuff cleaned out that shouldn't be there. Put your new drain tile in, put the right filter rock and all that around it, then re-pour the concrete.
Correct.
So I just had an inspection 3 days ago, and that was one of the claims of the homeowner. I could test and I could see where there was water damage indicators and high mold counts in the perimeter energy walls.
Okay.
But he didn't even have a sump basket, or he didn't have a sump pump put into the basket because he says, well, my neighbors on both sides of me have water and their pumps run all the time.
Oh.
And he said, and mine it doesn't get that much water in it. So I just have never worried about it. And so this is one of those bridges that he's going to have to cross.
Yes.
And have a little bit of investigation done that his house might be saturated underneath with water, but there's something about his builder and what they put in that his drain tile actually isn't working.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
So if you have a dry sump basket or a barely damp one and your neighbors don't, it may not be that you have a special blessing on your life. It may be that you have a problem with your drain tile.
Oh, so true. Yes.
Yeah. So how about the newer houses where the bearing walls in the center of these bigger spans get poured right on top, or the bearing walls get framed right on top of the footings, and then the concrete floor gets poured around it. So essentially your framed wall has a treated plate at the bottom that's sitting on the footing, but then your concrete is poured. It's 4 inches thick. So now you have 2.5 inches of non-treated vertical lumber sitting in that trough. And when you have that water come up, do you ever excavate around those walls and put drain tile in the centers of basements?
Yes, definitely. Yes. We oftentimes will do it as part of the initial bid.
Yeah.
That, especially with the water table rising, it's definitely going to come up around there.
Yeah. One thing I think people should know, if you've never been around this or recognize this, and it's easiest to see in this style home. This would be a newer home, maybe 15 years and newer. I don't know exactly when it started in every part of the country, but there was a way that when developments got put in to get the houses framed up fast, and when the framing crew was already there, you have to set your bearing wall. This is the wall in the basement that holds up the floor and any other floors above it. And you have to set, before you can frame your main floor, if you have a basement or a crawl space, you have to set that.
Mm-hmm.
And so it used to be that they would pour the concrete floor over those footings in the middle, then frame the wall on top. Well, it got to be that they started framing first, and so that framing went down. Well, if you have a sump basket or sump pump, and if that ever quits because the power goes out or because the pump quits, and that is one of the key indicators that you'll see besides the sump basket. If you see water at the top of your sump basket, you have water at the top of that trough you have water at the top edge of where all the edges of your walls, the perimeter of the wall meets the floor all throughout your house.
Yes.
And you have to go check all those areas. It's
Yeah.
not just at your sump basket that it's that tall.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So how about anything else? Tell us about some of the exciting stuff you do with walls and sinking buildings.
Yeah, those are part of the foundation repair. If there is a wall that's kind of bellying in or it's pushing in, we typically would excavate along that wall and put in what are called wall earth anchors. So it's almost like a sandwich effect. You're making this big sandwich. You're stacking it in with a plate inside, a rod between it, and a plate outside. And by tightening that together, the wall is straightening. Relieving pressure from the top just a little bit and pushing back on the bottom, we can straighten many walls and have done that. And then there's also, and typically all of these problems lead back to water.
Yes.
Improper water management, that it just gets ignored, or it gets, oh, we don't have to worry about that. But yeah, really should.
And it could be a seasonal thing, right? It could happen, say, one time 8 years ago, but it really hasn't happened since. Boy, we had all that rain 8 years ago, but it's been dry. It's been normal ever since. But in that one time could be the time that it let things go.
For sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
For sure. It made that weakness. And the other part would be sometimes folks will call us and say, our door doesn't close right anymore on the main level.
Yeah.
And there's cracks above the windows. So typically it would mean that there's a fracture somewhere in the foundation that has dropped.
Yes.
So tooling devices, we can measure and find out where that is. Dig down under the footing, either from the inside or the outside, and basically lift it back up.
And how are you lifting, generally speaking, how are you lifting that back up? Obviously, you've got two very strong and very athletic sons, but I'm assuming it's not the three of you lifting this up or the crews.
Not quite. Only buckets, Dean, on that.
Right.
No, it's a small hydraulic ram that we actually use the bottom of the footing to set the ram in place, and then push down a number of segments until we get to a certain hydraulic PSI pressure that is typically down to solid substrate, solid ground, so then we can lift on.
Right.
And
so there's sufficient resistance that actually will push back and hold, so that you've got something solid for the house to now rest on, versus whatever the faulty, or not even faulty, just the origin of the soil in that area.
Yes.
So you do that both commercial and residential, right?
Yes.
In any of this work, obviously. How about then when it comes to the drain tile, obviously you have to have the water go someplace. So let's talk a little bit about what you do for the sump basket, and then can you touch a little bit on radon?
Yeah. Yeah, the sump basket is a very strong plastic basin that's typically 30 inches tall and maybe a 2-foot diameter circumference. The drain tile is connected right into that sump basket, and the question is, why do you have to use such a deep sump basket?
Yeah.
And we talked a little bit about this already, making sure the drain tile is draining, and that's exactly why, because we want the sump pump to cycle before the water starts backing up into the drain tile.
Yes.
I see that all the time. The drain tile is half full before the sump pump even cycles.
That is a really good point.
Yeah.
And it's a subtle one. Most people wouldn't even think about that part.
Right.
Because your drain tile should stay empty.
Correct.
So when it has water and something has to get through it, it's flowing, it's moving, but it should never be sedentary or sitting in place. the drain tile should always either have flowing water or no water.
Correct.
Yeah, that's good. That's a great point because people can check that out themselves.
Yep.
There was one other thing I thought about too, before we move on and talk about radon, is one of the thing that bridges the inside to the outside, and this is sometimes for function, but obviously function of escape or egress. You guys also put egress windows in, so you're also cutting foundation walls.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about that. Block wall versus stone wall versus poured wall.
Oh, you make sure you want to have a really good blade before you start cutting into a solid poured wall, and especially a rock wall.
Yeah.
We try to stay away from a rock wall because it's almost priced out of the amount of time and effort you can do it for.
Yeah.
But still, we do. The block wall or the wood wall is the easiest. Other than that, it's very nice to have an egress window because it gives you more light. It gives you obviously a place of escape if you need to get out.
Yeah.
You cannot get to the stairs.
More ventilation, natural ventilation.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. So let's go back to radon. Tell us a little bit about radon and how that is affected by your drain tile system and your sump basket.
Yeah, the radon system is connected directly to the drain tile. We do that because we don't want to hinder the service of a sump pump, because there's a solid lid on top of the sump basket sealed down. So if that ever had to be serviced, you don't have to move the pipe for the radon
Yes.
to get to the sump basket or the sump pump itself. So it basically is a 3-inch or 4-inch PVC pipe going up the wall and then venting out the roof of the house. And there's a fan, I call it a fan, some call it a pump, that is drawing air out from underneath of the basement floor. And that air is drawing away the moisture, which is a big key. We talked about that a while back, that, without even realizing it, the people are drying out their basement even more by having a radon system installed.
And I got to tell you, that is one of the key things I've learned from you. And then as I have canvassed customers, so as I go into homes, visit with folks, see how everything is set up, and if I see they have a radon system or a newer radon system, I ask them the question, how much do you use your dehumidifier now? And I'll say something like, compared to 10 years ago. I usually don't ask them compared to when you did the radon system because I don't want them to make a comparison right away. I just want them to tell me the information. Every last one of them says, well, we don't use the dehumidifier nearly as much, and part of the year we just shut it off now.
Yes.
And then we talk a little bit about the radon system, and then all of a sudden it clicks in them, and they go, yeah, that's actually when that started. And we have watched it now. This is probably at least 3 years ago that you and I talked about this, maybe even more. And I've literally, it's one of the things that I actually look for, ask, about. Okay. And it is absolutely true. We've got actually some clients that we've run into who don't use a dehumidifier in their basement anymore once the radon system was put in.
Boy, right on. That's great.
Yeah. So here's another important thing that I think you differentiated and you called out that probably people would be apt to miss if they don't see a number of these systems. I see a number of these where a radon mitigation company comes in to install a system, which basically is it's a white PVC pipe that goes under the slab of your house, draws air from away from the underside of your house and radon, and puts it out up into the air. And there's actually better and best ways to do this.
Yeah.
And so a better way obviously is to be able to use the drain tile system. And some of the companies will just poke the pipe through the cover of the sump basket, like you said. And that can be problematic because you need to be able to access and service that sump pump. And usually when you need to do that is usually when it's an emergency
Right.
and you want to have easy access to it. So there's two things that I see happen. Number one, it's in the way. And so you're dismantling things and disrupting things, trying to get at your sump basket so that you can replace your pump or repair it. But here's the other thing I think most people don't think about is when the pipe for your radon is installed a little bit away, a little space away from the basket and goes directly into the tile, when you do any service work on your sump basket, your radon system is still working. It's not sealed, but it's still drawing air as it would and as it should. So if you temporarily put the cover back on to go to the store to get a new sump pump, your radon system is still pumping air out of that drain tile.
Yes.
So there's two really good reasons.
Very active. Yep.
Yeah. That it's really interesting, the whole idea of radon. And, again, we're going to have people from all over the country and probably different parts of the world. We actually have a few of those listeners now, that some of this will vary a little bit from region to region, depending on your climate, your geography, topography, and all of that. But in North America, there's a large landmass that is affected negatively by radon. And so in the middle of where we live, this is a really big issue.
Yes.
And this is work that you provide, installing the system, right?
Yes.
How do you deal with the numbers or defining, assessing if you need radon mitigation for people? Do you do the testing?
We do not do the testing. Oftentimes folks will come to us and say, well, this is the reading that we have, and can you do something to help us with it? And yeah, we can do that.
Okay.
So we are not involved in the testing part.
Yeah. And it's something really simple for you. I mean, you're at the perfect place of doing what you're doing to install the system, because you're the ones dealing with that drain pipe and with the sump basket and all that in the house.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a perfect time to do it.
Yeah.
So I was in a house yesterday in Minneapolis, and they have 100-year-old foundation, and it's an interesting, partly decorative block with open cores. And then when they got down further in the soil, the block simplified on the outside surface. And they've got water coming in. There are large chunks of grout mortar missing.
Oh.
And when it rains really hard, because the houses are 15 feet apart, concrete driveway immediately right next to the house on one side. The driveway on the other side is literally 4 feet away.
Oh.
And raised up. They put a retaining wall, did some drainage, but they literally have water running in through those spots. And people have cracked walls, long cracks that kind of go from the top down, at an angle, and then some do the stair step and follow the mortar joints.
Yes.
What would you do in a case where you've got these close proximity homes? Excavation, it's not an option. You have to do the interior. What would you propose? And the concrete floor ranges probably from 2 to 3 inches thick, and it's not very good condition. Plus, in their case, they already tore up about 12 feet of trench inside because they replaced the sewer line going out to the street. And they actually did the right thing on the inside, and they made correct connections and went lower with it. These people actually want to lower their floor. They want to gain a little bit of headroom. So obviously you're dealing with original footings, and you want to go a little bit lower, drainage. Can you tell us, kind of simply walk us through what you would do in this process without having seen it?
Yes. With the wall cracks and the water coming through the walls like that, we talked to and referred to earlier the sealant on the outside, and then that other barrier, the dimple board membrane.
Yeah.
Exposing the wall, many times the basements are finished now, as you know. So we need to expose the wall and then treat that crack that's leaking. We can seal it, but oftentimes that leads to water coming in another spot.
Right. It's like the Dutch boy trying to put his fingers in the holes in the dam, right?
Exactly.
Nothing against the Dutch.
No, not at all. But that's what happens many times.
Yeah.
So that membrane, and then, yes, lowering the floor, that's typically We haven't done a lot of that, but just being sure that the footing is still in a proper condition.
And
Extend
you might be able to put piers in to support,
correct.
right? So you could put a plate underneath, dig out, put a plate underneath, and drive these segments down into the ground to firm up if it needed to help
Yes,
support that retrofit.
yes.
Yeah. Okay.
And oftentimes, Dean, we're needing to get our drain tile inside low enough so the water is coming in underneath of the footing.
Yeah.
So that is a huge concern.
Yes.
You have water coming underneath the foundation.
Yes,
So we
exactly.
need to make sure we take steps to prevent the soil from washing, but let the water come. So
Yes.
there's a product we use that does that, that accomplishes that. So it's a heavy mesh fabric that goes along the side of the footing and below it, and then the bottom of the trench.
So if I can clarify, and then you correct me if you see a better way. So in this case, let's say the footing was all going to be okay. There was an engineer design that was going to take care of how that should be poured back, what level the floor gets at. You take the dimple board, you're going to put this up so it's at least above the grade level, right, where the soil is outside.
Yes.
And you're going to bring that down the wall, and you want to bring that down so that whatever gets between that dimple board and that leaking foundation wall will run down to the drain tile.
Yes.
And you pour your floor back up against that, so that kind of you've kind of quote unquote sealed it, even though it's not sealed, but you've poured the floor against it. So now the water that comes in from the outside foundation wall stays next to the foundation wall and just goes to the drain tile.
Yes.
Okay. So in the past, and even currently, there's another system that resembles that, but it doesn't go full height. You want to talk a little bit about what we've talked about in the past, about where we've got this either waffle board or dimple board that sticks up above your concrete floor. And people will see this usually as black or brown. And it will either look like round dimples poked and holding the plastic away from the wall, or it will look like a corrugated piece of cardboard usually that kind of sticks up above your concrete slab, usually 1 to 3 inches. And then there's kind of a gap between the foundation wall. There's like a dark gap if you shine a flashlight in there. Where does that gap go, and why is that there? Tell us about what you and I have talked about.
Yes, the gap theory.
Yes.
No, that's Anyway,
this is the gap reality.
Yes, this is gap reality. Where the foundation is, yes, that black or brown product typically would allow water that's coming from the walls to get down and into the drain tile.
Yes.
If it's put in correctly. Because for that too, if you take your foundation, your wall, and then the top of the footing, if the floor is put directly on top of that, the water coming in has no place to go. So it does have a very powerful point. It's stuck and then it spills over top of the floor.
Yes.
So even in some of these homes, Dean, I know I'm getting off on the question, but if you have a home that has underfloor heat,
yes,
okay, and that has that styrofoam, that's laid on the footing and then the floor on top of that.
Yep.
So oftentimes that floor is leaking, it's coming right up. So that dimple board has a very powerful purpose to let the water out and down to the drain tile.
Without getting stopped there.
Without getting stopped.
Yeah. And it's something that you wouldn't necessarily see from standing in the room. You wouldn't know.
Right.
Yeah. And that's where to be able to have access to people who have worked with these materials, taken things apart, put them back together in better ways, for all the do-it-yourselfers out there, and for all the people, and this is going to be the painful statement, for all the people who think you're at the end of your money and you don't have, you can't do anything. Obviously, I want you to keep thinking outside the box and figure out how on earth can you make something happen to get the right people in your life to help give you the guidance and then to actually do the project. And I think sometimes when we're sick, we give up too easily. And you need to really get people around you who can encourage you, and especially get people around you who can maybe even coach you on how can we make more money in our family, even though we're all sick or whatever. There's got to be a way to overcome this. And this is such a key example to me that you can have something so significant as what Kevin just talked about that can cause such a big problem in the home, and you don't really even realize it because you don't see it, but it's there, and you need a guy like Kevin there to help identify that for you.
Mm-hmm.
It's really important.
Right.
There was a second piece with that I brought to Kevin's attention, is that we get an exchange sometimes of the earth air coming up from the ground through that gap that's down by the floor, and then we get construction folks who frame walls up, and they butt the wall up against that little piece of plastic that's sticking up above your concrete floor, and they insulate, and they put the drywall over it, and you paint it, and you put your baseboards on it, and it's beautiful. And meanwhile, there's two things that are happening behind that. That gap is still open. And so wet always goes to dry, and that means liquid. So anyone who's listened to the podcast, we're talking about liquid and vapor, and I'm talking about vapor in this case. The earth, if it's soaking wet underneath, is going to vent up into that dry wall cavity and get that wall cavity wet enough to grow mold. And so many people who have basements in this country have moldy energy walls for various reasons, and this is one of those reasons, is because of the design of that. And so anytime that, and we all do what we know, and we do the best of what we know, at least we hope we do. Most of us, I think, do, with what we have to work with. In 1997, I used the materials that were manufactured at the time and the suggestions at the time to put my energy walls in my house. It caused moldy walls in my house. I did it. I installed it. I can't blame anyone. I could sit and blame the manufacturer all day long, but I still did it. I didn't think through it, and I probably should have, could have, and wouldn't want to repeat it again. So obviously, with a whole bunch of this, we learn through time, and none of us is perfect.
Right.
And that was before I was in the industry even. But it took me until 2012 or 13 to figure out that I actually had a problem in my home. So, you know, I have to take responsibility. And I see a lot of threads in social media where there's a lot of people who are hurt, but at the same time, they still have to take some amount of responsibility, and they won't.
Yeah.
And that's tough. It's tough for you and I because we're in the drainage issues that can hinder really the health of a home. And for people to be able to become aware of this, number one, to me, that's the foundation to be able to gain knowledge and then to be wise in the decisions that you make about which home to buy, how to remodel your home, how to be an advocate for yourself when a remodeler comes and says, no, we're going to do it this way. You might need to get a different remodeler if they refuse to do what you know is a better way. Yes. And you need to watch some of these projects. But you also need to watch, you know, really in the whole thing, you need to watch how much time you're spending actually learning about this stuff because you really need to know. And so it's one of those things I know Kevin does when he goes out. I know he visits with homeowners and he spends a lot of time doing education because he's got a good following and a good referral source from people that he's worked for and that his boys work for, and that before him, his father-in-law, they have a really good 3-generation family company. And so look for those type of people that you know are there sincerely to help you, because any of us in business, we know that if we help people, we know that our businesses will run just fine. And when we take care of those things. So Kevin, what are a couple for this segment? Obviously, I think there's some other things that we can dive into in very specific podcasts to deal with and kind of take apart and assemble, you know, again, dealing with some other things, including different types of foundations, obviously, right?
Yes.
Wood foundation walls, foam foundations that are poured concrete. What would be a key 1 or 2 things you would want to leave with people today?
I would say that one of the key things is to just walk around your house, and if there's any low spots where water would sit during a rainstorm, try to correct that yourself, and if not, well, then call out for some help. But that's so often the case that even go out in the rain once after the rain has come and see where that water is sitting, and
Yes.
you may solve that problem right away.
That's a good one.
Even if there isn't a problem, you're going to help it from not becoming one.
Exactly.
So, but one thing too, Dean, we've talked about, and you know this more than anything, how it's so important, I guess, as a life uh, training ground to be a good listener and
Yes.
not trying to run ahead and answer the question in your head while the person you're talking to is still speaking to you. Right?
Very good point.
So just taking it in because you want to help with your business. It's not because of the business, but it's because of the people you're trying to help.
Absolutely.
So that's kind of what we've learned over the years.
Yeah. Can I throw one on top of that? And
Yeah.
I'm gonna make it a reciprocal thing for the client, for the people who are out there who hire professionals. If you have somebody in your home working with you, working for you, that you know have quality information, please listen to them.
Yes.
Because
Right.
guys like Kevin and guys like me, we're going to share some really important things with you. I'm going to give you one quick example. Recently, I was in a home. I did an Instascope assessment, so every room of the home gets scanned for the air quality. We determine what the levels of mold are in the home. The visual inspection that goes along with it is more important than that assessment, but that assessment gives us data that we wouldn't have any other way.
Mm-hmm.
As I'm sitting and doing what we call the debrief at their dining room table, I have two professional people I'm sitting with. And the mold count in the dining room we're sitting in is at 17,000, which is a high number.
Mm.
Okay? Something is going on. However, I believe with 98% certainty by this point the inspection is done, the problem has nothing to do with the dining room. There is no issue in the dining room. The dining room simply has a bunch of air in it from other contaminated areas of the home.
Okay.
I explained this to the homeowners, and I'd already explained in a general way how that works. Almost immediately, I could see in both of their faces, they were off thinking about what they thought the cause of everything was in that dining room.
Mm.
They were already thinking, we have to tear apart the dining room. And I wasn't saying any of that. In fact, I'd already told them we don't have to tear apart the dining room. The dining room is beautiful.
Okay.
The air in the dining room needs to be cleaned up. We need to clean up the source of how the air got to the dining room. The dining room air will correct itself. It will be just fine.
Gotcha.
So I explained the second time. Immediately, one of them at the table says, maybe it's the windows. And so if anyone's kind of picking up on this, instead of the clients at the table just sitting and listening and just maybe taking a note,
Mm-hmm.
and just letting the information fall and ponder it, they're racing ahead into places that are going to cost them thousands and thousands of dollars that they don't even need to go.
Yes, for sure. Exactly.
Right?
Right on.
So
yeah.
we see it both ways. We see guys and gals in our position that don't listen.
Right.
You can go order a chicken sandwich and you could have it come out wrong, and it's the only thing that person had to do was take your chicken sandwich order, right? And you get a cheeseburger. And you're like, how does that happen? Right. So we see it that way. But I also saw it just recently on a client one that it was really pronounced. And so just the encouragement is probably all of us need to make sure we're listening.
Right.
So, Kevin, we're at an hour. So time goes fast when you do these things. There's so much to talk about. I want to give people a way to contact you, especially people who is your primary service area? Who would you love to work for? What geographic area?
We're typically within 2 hours of St. Cloud.
Yeah, so you service most of central Minnesota.
Yeah.
You probably can touch the western edge of Wisconsin, and
Yes.
that's your favorite area. You've
That's
obviously So everyone understands he's gone way farther out than that before. So they're very experienced and they know how to do what they're doing. So for the upper Midwest, and especially, within a couple of hours of St. Cloud, Minnesota, this would be the company that you would want for your foundation work. And I'm going to tell you, you're going to go to their website, and we can post this for you. But if you want to write this down or go type it in right now, which so many people want to do, when they get that fresh information, they want to capitalize. I know I do. You're going to go to safedrybasement.com. Is that the right one?
That's correct.
All right, safedrybasement.com. And that will get you over to the basement water controlled website. That'll connect you to Kevin's family and their crews. And it's been a great time talking with you today. I really appreciate you coming on.
Thank you, Dean.
All right, so that was Kevin Schneidermann, and this is the Manage Mold podcast. I want everybody to keep telling other people about what you're learning because maybe they haven't heard about us before. And Kevin is another one of our favorite guests that we've had on. And by now, you would have heard from a couple of our clients that we've done some work with. And Michael Pinto has been on, and we are going to have some other cool interviews coming up. So keep coming back, keep tuning in. We're going to keep guiding you with some really fantastic information. And along the way, you're going to take all these building blocks, and you're going to be able to not only help yourself, but you're going to be able to help family members and your neighbors when they are in times of need. So again, we always want to be an encouragement to you. We want you to be an encouragement to others. Life is short, and we need to take care of each other. So go and do that today, and we'll see you at the next podcast. Thanks.